Hi again, everyone, and thank you for joining us as we continue our Life After Lent interview series. Today, I am happy to welcome and introduce Dr. Sofia Pham from the Lend class of 2017-2018. For those of you who don't know Sophia, she is a licensed psychologist who obtained her bachelor's in psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, and then followed with her Master of Education in School Psychology from Temple University, where she also obtained her PhD in school psychology. While Sophia was completing the LEND program here at WIHD, she also completed her postdoctoral clinical training in the behavioral psychology program here at WIHD. Currently, Sophia is the assistant professor in the Department of School Psychology at the School of Professional and Applied Psychology at the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine. So thank you for being with us today, Sophia, and welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So as we begin, and we're excited to have you here and to learn about, what brought you to LEND, what has been the impact as it relates to the work that you were doing while both here at WHD as a postdoctoral fellow, as well as how it has informed your role and the work that you do both as a school psychologist and now as a professor who is training and teaching the next generation of school psychologists. So with that, I'll just open it up and you can take it from there.
Okay, sounds good. I think I will start from the beginning of what brought me to LEND. So in 2016, I got my first job out of graduate school, and I worked as a school psychologist in New York City. And at the time, I really disagreed with the school's disciplinary policies and how they manage challenging behaviors, and felt that I also needed some more training in order to better serve the students. And I felt like one of my areas of weakness was, behavioral psychology. My training program really focused on, cognitive and educational assessment. So that's how I found WIHD. And during my interview for the postdoctoral position, that's when I started learning about LEND and, the impact that my training could have on, learning more about how to be a leader in the field, and really just learning more about neurodevelopmental disorders. So I kind of went into the training really without knowing too much, and hopefully coming out of it some skills that I could bring back. During my time at WIHD, I really had an opportunity to work directly with parents. This is something that I really didn't have a chance to do in the school setting. And that was a really rewarding experience. I think I learned a lot more about the parent perspective and just focusing on the whole child, as opposed to just focusing on educational outcomes, right? And really thinking about the individual kind of across the lifespan. And that has really influenced how I approach a case now, and how I talk to other service providers about, individual needs. I think it's really important to be consistent in the services that we deliver and not to work in isolation, which is something that you often do as a school psychologist. And then how it relates to my current position as a trainer, I think it's really getting the students to see outside of their own kind of perspective as a school psychologist, and to really learn more about what other disciplines are focused on and what really matters, to the individual or the family members. It may not always be just, the educational outcomes or, the communication skills. Like, what are the kind of overarching goals that will help improve the individual's quality of life?
So can you just spend some time talking a little bit more about your path after Len graduation to where you are currently now in this role, working with school psychology students?
Sure. So I've done a lot over the past few years. So after Lend, I took a job with a charter network in New York City. And I served as the regional school psychologist for all 13 of their schools. My role was to develop behavior intervention plans for students, and conduct FBAs, functional behavior assessments, um, to really supplement students with disabilities who had IEPs. During my time there, I discovered a lot of, kind of system level issues with how, BIPs were used and what their purpose was really for. And in most cases, I would say they asked for a BIP because they wanted a paraprofessional, but no one really thought about, how to utilize that paraprofessional to, best support the students. So I really shifted my focus into training teachers, training school leaders on the purpose of an FBA and BIP, and help them monitor, their staff. And our time together really turned into, more consultation sessions, and even started, training them on how to collect data and how to look at behaviors more objectively. I want to say I tried to implement some policy changes. Oftentimes, I don't think our priorities were aligned. And as you know, when you want to make a change at the system level, what better way than to kind of work within the system and learn more about it. And I had an opportunity to work for the New York City Department of Education. So I took on the role at a what we call a CSE, a Committee on Special Education, with the DOE, where I was pretty much in charge of doing a lot of the decision making when it came to the services that would be provided with children with disabilities, and those were students who actually attended all non-public schools. If sometimes I didn't even directly assess the student, right? And you attend an IEP meeting and you have to make some pretty high stakes decisions, right, within a very short period of time. And then the pandemic hit and we all went remote. And I thought a lot about kind of, what is the purpose, right, of this work that we do. And so I thought about, what more could I do, besides, trying to convince every person that I encountered that they maybe should consider doing things a little bit differently, and really, making data-based decisions. And that's when I really started thinking about, perhaps my role needed to change. And maybe I would have, a bigger impact as a trainer, as opposed to, as just a lowly school psychologist for the DOE. And it would also give me an opportunity to continue to do research, which is something that I've always been very passionate about. I've been doing research since my undergraduate years and actually had, continued to be involved with research, even though I worked in the school setting for most of my postgraduate years.
Oh, perfectly, and I appreciate you sort of describing the journey and kind of how you arrived where you are. You may recall one of the things we talk about in Land when we talk about leadership is how it's a developmental process and it doesn't ever end. And so you sort of describe how you continue to build on those experiences and keep moving forward, and how the work evolves for you. I want to just ask a follow-up question as it relates to describing some of the challenges that you saw and were trying to address when working in the charter and the public school systems. Because I know from your work just the importance of being culturally responsive and ensuring inclusion and equity. And so I'm just curious if you can share with us a little bit about how Lend may have helped to just inform or shape that, and if there are any other considerations for all of us as we just thrive to really create more equitable, inclusive environments.
You- In some of the challenges I saw in the school setting, really, I would say, was an overemphasis on like a one size fit all approach. And oftentimes, when I say that people were not making database decisions, they would argue that they were, but they were mostly basing it on, one dimensional data, right? Test scores, or whether or not the child engages in certain behaviors. Um, and I felt like oftentimes they didn't take into consideration, the child's previous, experiences, resources that they had at home, and whether or not the specific recommendation was appropriate. The one thing that I really took away was, taking the time to think through what's practical. I remember somebody said that their child had this pretty rigorous exercise plan, right? In order to maintain, a healthy weight. And it was, daily workouts. And the one thing this individual shared was that, how many of us can say that we're working out for X number of minutes every day, right? And then to kind of, punish the child or to withhold a reinforcer because they were not able to meet the goal. Um, and I think sometimes as adults, we set very unrealistic expectations for children, right, in general. And it becomes more of a problem when we do that with individuals with disabilities, right? It's in essence kind of ignoring their needs and not really tailoring, recommendations to what they're really capable of doing. And I think a lot more about, the intersectionality between, disability, and, culture, race, right, socioeconomic status. These are things I think schools try to ignore because, not that they don't care about these issues, but their approach is they shouldn't matter, right? It shouldn't hold anyone back.
In terms of the impact of lend, you mentioned that you learn more about the parent perspective. So you kind of step back, and I know, we've done a lot. Of course, I've led sessions about, parent professional
Yeah,
partnerships. Um, and we had the family mentorship experience assignment, right, where you got to meet with
yeah.
families. So do you want to talk about how lend impacted you that way?
Um, so I will say going into this field, I remember we had a course in graduate school that was what is the role and function of school psychologists. And we also had parents come in to talk to us. And I was very shocked, to be honest, about how much it seemed like the parents did not like us. And trying to understand why, right? Because when you're a first year graduate student, you're going in thinking, I'm here to help children, right? Here to help your child. And then I really didn't understand why there was so much almost like animosity, right? But when I was at Len, I really got to see why there is that, sentiment, because they see so many professionals. And I think going into the field kind of focused on what my intentions were, without really understanding that maybe there are other professionals who are not so great at communicating and who are not as helpful, and certainly working in all the schools that I've been in, right, with the DOE. It's over 25 different schools with a lot of different staff members, and you kind of start to see why parents are so frustrated. They've been through the system, they've been failed many times, and the day-to-day things that they need to consider. I remember going out with the family for lunch, during the LEND program, and the one thing the mother told me was, there are a limited number of places we can go to because not a lot of restaurants are very friendly towards kids with disabilities, right? Something that I hadn't considered. And it's something you don't really think about when you're just working in the school setting, because you're kind of just in charge of making sure that the teachers are interacting appropriately with the child. But then you also have to think about life outside of, those 6 or 7 hours of school. And you do start to understand why there is so much frustration, right? And almost resentment towards the system that's supposed to help them.
Certainly seems like the program had a strong impact on you. I mean, that you could learn all that, from the experiences you had from the classes you took
Yeah.
at Len. Great. So, I mean, if you were going to say, if you were going to share with a prospective Len trainee, someone who is thinking of joining the program, what are one or two key takeaways you would want to share?
I think over the years, what I've learned, or what's most important to me, is really acknowledging that it's normal to have disagreements. And it's also normal for parents to disagree with your recommendation, or, for another service provider to disagree. I think people's knee-jerk reaction, and I certainly had that reaction myself at some point, is to feel like, it my professionalism, right, is being challenged, or I'm being told I'm wrong. But I often, am able now to kind of appreciate, right, the disagreement, and to have that dialogue. And because ultimately, I think our goals should be the same, right? It's to do what's best for the child. And so I would say, yeah, the key takeaway is just to be, open to having conversations that may be uncomfortable, and just go in with the mindset that, you don't always have to be right, as long as you're doing what's best for
I-
the individual.
Yeah, and I just want to say something, because based on something you mentioned before, you talked about how, as a school psychologist, you don't necessarily have to collaborate with other service providers, and you're kind of in your own bubble. But it sounds like, from learning about the parent perspective, particularly, and other perspectives, that's so key for collaboration. That's so key for partnering, right? Because then you're able to step into someone else's perspective or someone else's
Right.
shoes. And
Yeah.
that really helps with partnering, because then it's not all about just your area, it's about what everybody else is possibly experiencing.
Right. And it should be a collaborative experience, because we all come in with our own areas of expertise.
Right.
Um, and I think we're able to achieve more success if we are working together. And I think it's unfortunate that in a school setting, sometimes there isn't that opportunity, right, built into the role to collaborate. So hopefully that will change.
Hopefully, I mean, I guess there's so many needs, and certainly with more children being
Yeah.
identified with special needs, the
Right.
caseloads are just growing. So it is a challenge.
As we talk about just also continuing the collaboration and involvement with Len trainees, I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about how we can, the program and faculty can ensure that we do continue to collaborate and transition from the mentor trainee relationship to being colleagues and collaborators.
I think some of the work that would probably be most meaningful to current and past trainees, right, is to do more applied research, right? The kind of applied projects that we can have. Many of us end up in positions where we do have access, right, to a lot of data and real world problems that can then be kind of brought back.
And so I guess the only final comment, Sophia, is there anything that we didn't comment on or brought up that you just have as any final thoughts or comments?
I guess the only thing is for any prospective Len trainees to know that it is kind of a lifelong learning experience, and that we should all continue to read and learn more in order to improve our practice and understanding of these issues.
Well, thank you, Sophia. Thanks for being with us today, and we look forward to learning more about where your professional and your career takes you. Thank
Great,
you.
thank you.
Thank you very much.